Move, old man, you're in the way of people who matter. That is how it began, and I have turned the words over so many times since that I can give them to you exactly. I had my broom in my two hands, and I was clearing the gutter where the carriages crossed to the palace gate, and the gentleman in the pale gray coat said them to me as if he were reading them off a list of true things. People who matter, as though there were a register kept somewhere, and my name had been left out of it on purpose. My name is Job Tyndall. I have swept the Cross Lane crossing, the one where the King's Mile meets the lane that runs down to the river market, right under the rail of the palace forecourt, for 31 years. I was a young man with a strong back when I took the broom, and I am an old one with a bent one now, and in all that time I have kept that square of stone clean enough that a lady could cross it in white shoes and not turn an ankle on the muck the horses leave. That is the work. It is small work. I have never once thought it was the kind of work that put a man in anybody's way. But the gentleman in gray thought so. He had come out of one of the tall houses on the upper mile, the ones with the iron lamps and the servants who polish the door brass twice a day, and he was crossing to where his carriage waited at the rail, and I had bent to scrape a clod of mud out of the seam between two stones so it would not be tracked across, and that put my old bent back in the path of his fine boots for the space of one breath. One breath. And he stopped, and he looked down at me the way a man looks at a thing that has spoiled his morning. Move, old man, you're in the way of people who matter. I said, beg pardon, sir, and I shuffled back. I have learned in 31 years that beg pardon is the cheapest coin there is, and it buys peace 9 times in 10. I thought it would buy peace that morning. It did not. He had an audience, you see. That was the thing of it. A man like that does not waste his contempt on an empty street. The morning crowd was thick at the rail. It always is at the changing of the guard, when the whole city seems to find a reason to be near the palace at the same hour. And there were perhaps 40 people standing close enough to hear, tourists with their phones up, 2 nursemaids with prams, a knot of clerks late for their offices and glad of an excuse to dawdle, a flower woman with her barrow. And the gentleman in gray, having found me in his way, found also that he had a stage. Look at this, he said, not to me now but to the rail, turning so the crowd could see his fine profile. This is what we step over to get to our own front doors. A man with a broom. He said it the way you would say a man with a disease. Do you know what you are? He asked me, and he did not wait for an answer because the answer was his and he had been saving it. You are the lowest thing on this whole street. There is the palace and there is the king, and there are men of property and tradesmen and laborers and dogs, and then somewhere down past the dogs there is you, the man with the broom. You are what is left over when everything worth counting has been counted. I want to tell you that I had a fine answer ready. A working man dreams, sometimes, of the thing he would say to the gentleman in gray if he were not afraid, if he were younger, if the words came when they were wanted instead of 3 hours later in the dark. But I am not going to lie to you, because this is a true account and a man does not garnish the truth to make himself look brave. I had no answer. I stood there with my broom and my cap in my hand. I had taken my cap off, God help me, out of the habit of a lifetime, and I felt the heat come up my neck and into my ears, and I felt 40 people look at me and then look away, the way you look away from a thing you are ashamed to be near. And I felt, for the first time in a long time, exactly as small as he had said I was. That is when I felt the eyes. Not the crowd's. The crowd's eyes I knew. There was one other man on that crossing who had not looked away, and I felt his attention the way you feel the sun come out behind you, on the back of your neck, before you turn to see it. He stood at the foot of the rail, 6 paces off, on the spot where the King's Guard stands his sentry over the forecourt approach. I had seen him there 100 mornings. We all had. He was the soldier in the red tunic and the tall black bearskin, the white gloves, the rifle held just so, the medals catching the light, the kind of man the tourists come 1,000 miles to photograph, and the kind of man none of us in the lane had ever heard say a single word. He did not move. He did not speak. He was not, by every rule of his post, permitted to do either. He stood the way that kind of soldier stands, which is the way a wall stands, except that a wall does not choose, and I had the sudden strange certainty that morning that this man was choosing, that all his stillness was a decision he was making over and over with great effort in front of us. And his eyes had come to me. I do not know how to make you understand what that was, unless you have been the lowest thing on the street with 40 faces turned away from you. He did not pity me. I have had pity, and I know its weight, and that was not it. He looked at me the way you look at a man you have decided to stand with. It was steady, and it was level, and it was not afraid of the gentleman in gray at all, and it lasted only a moment because he had a post to keep, but in that moment something in me that had bent right down to the cobbles stood back up. I cannot put it plainer than that. He had not moved a muscle, and he had set me on my feet. The gentleman in gray was still talking. He had warmed to it. Contempt is a fire that feeds itself, and he had a good audience and a victim who would not fight back. And so he went on, telling the rail what a man like me was worth, which was nothing, and what a man like him was worth, which was a great deal, and you could see one or two in the crowd begin to smile along with him, because that is what frightened people do. They laugh on the side of the man who is not hurting them. The flower woman did not laugh. The two nursemaids did not, but some did. He probably can't even read, the gentleman said, and there was the laugh he wanted. Can you read, old man? Or do you just push that broom up and down because it's the one thing simple enough for you? I can read. My mother taught me at the kitchen table by a tallow candle, and I have read a great deal in 130 years of long standing, because a man with a broom has time to think between the carriages. But I did not say so. I have found that telling a cruel man he is wrong about you only gives him a fresh thing to be cruel about. So I said nothing, and I put my cap back on, and I bent again to my work, because the work was still there, and the work, at least, never told me I was nothing. And the gentleman in gray, not done, not nearly done, did a thing then that I think he had been wanting to do from the start. He took a coin out of his waistcoat, a copper, the smallest there is, and he did not hand it to me, because to hand it to me he would have had to come within reach. He threw it. He threw it at my feet, the way you would toss a scrap to a dog you did not like, and it rang on the stone and rolled into the gutter I had just cleaned, into the wet, and he said, "There, now you've earned your keep for the day. Bow to me and you can keep it. Bow to me and you can keep it." I have thought about that, too, more than the first words even. There are men who want you to be poor, and there are men who want you to be poor and grateful, and the second kind is worse, because the first only takes your bread, but the second wants your bread and your knee both. He wanted me down in the gutter after the copper, where the muck was, in front of 40 people, so that the picture of the morning, the picture the tourists would carry away on their phones, would be of a fine gentleman standing tall and an old man on all fours in the wet, scrabbling after a coin worth less than nothing, and bowing. I looked at the copper in the gutter. I am ashamed to tell you that for one moment I thought about it. A copper is a copper. I am a poor man, and the day was cold, and there was a part of me, the part that has been hungry, that does not have pride to spare. For one moment I bent toward it. And then I heard the boots. Not running, you must understand that. Nothing about what the soldier did that morning was sudden, or wild, or anything you could call losing his composure. If you have it in your head that he broke and charged and there was a scene, put it out of your head. It was the opposite of that. It was the most deliberate thing I have ever watched a man do. He brought his rifle up to the shoulder arms, the way they do when they are about to move on the post, and then slow, square, every motion cut clean as if a drill sergeant were counting it out, he turned from his sentry line and he marched 3 paces onto the crossing, onto my crossing, the square of stone that has been mine for 130 years, where the lowest thing on the street does his small work. The gentleman in gray turned at the sound, and his face did a thing I will remember as long as I live. It went from triumph to confusion to a kind of bright, eager pleasure, all in about 2 seconds, because, And this is the part that tells you everything about the man. He thought the soldier was coming for me. He thought the king's guard had broken his post to deal with the troublesome old sweeper who was cluttering up the morning. He actually stepped back to give the soldier room to do it, and he half raised a hand toward the crowd, as if to say, "You see, even the king's own men know what this creature is worth." The soldier did not so much as look at him. He marched onto the crossing, and he halted that hard, square, beautiful halt, the boots coming together with a crack that you felt in your chest, and he was standing not in front of me but beside me, shoulder to shoulder, facing the rail and the crowd and the gentleman in gray, on my square of stone, as if it were a post he had been ordered to keep. And then slowly, with the same care he gave to everything, he came to attention, heels together. Rifle ordered, the butt coming down beside his boot with a single clean knock on the stone, chin level, eyes forward. And he saluted me. I do not mean he nodded. I do not mean he gave me some small private kindness that only I could see. I mean that the king's guard, in his red tunic and his bearskin and his medals, in front of 40 people and a dozen lifted phones, brought his white-gloved hand up to the peak of his cap in the full ceremonial salute that those men give to a colonel, to a general, to the colors, to the king himself. And he held it. He held it on me. On Job Tyndall, the man with the broom, the lowest thing on the street, with my cap in my hand and the muck on my apron and 130 years in my bent back. He held the salute on me as if I were a thing worth honoring. The street went quiet, not the false quiet of people waiting to laugh, the real kind, the kind that falls when something has happened that nobody has a ready answer for. The phones came up that had been down. The flower woman put her hand over her mouth. The clerks who had been smiling along with the gentleman in gray stopped smiling, and one of them, a young one, took his own hat off without seeming to know he had done it. And the gentleman in gray stood there with his copper in my gutter and his contempt going cold in his mouth, and he understood, I watched him understand, that the soldier had not come for me. The soldier had come for him, not with the rifle, not with a word. With a salute given to the man he had just called nothing, in front of everyone he had been performing for, so that there was now, on that crossing, only one possible reading of the morning, that the lowest thing on the street had just been honored by the king's own guard, and the fine gentleman in gray had not. I will tell you what I did because it matters to the rest. I did not know what to do. No one had ever saluted me in my life. I am a sweeper. We are not saluted. I stood there with the soldier's white glove held steady at his cap, and the whole street waiting, and the thing my body did before my mind could stop it was the only thing my body knew how to do when a man does you an honor. I straightened up. As far as a bent old back will go, I straightened it. I took the cap off my head. It was already off, but I took it lower down to my chest, over my heart. And I bowed, not to the gentleman in gray, not down to the gutter for his copper. I bowed to the soldier, the way one working man bows to another who has just done a brave thing, and I said, in a voice that did not come out as steady as I wanted, "Thank you, sir." And the soldier brought the salute down, slow, square, the white glove coming back to his side, and for 1/2 of 1 second before his face went back to the wall it had to be, he looked at me. And I swear before God there was the smallest possible thing at the corner of his mouth that on any other man you would have called a smile. Then he took up his rifle and he turned, square and clean, 3 paces back to his sentry line, and he halted, and he came up to the carry, and he was a statue again, eyes forward, as though nothing in the world had happened, as though he had not just turned the whole morning over like a man turning a stone. But it had happened. And everyone on that crossing had seen it, and the gentleman in gray was still standing there. I would like to tell you that he had the grace to be ashamed quietly and go. He did not at first. A man like that does not give up his stage so easily. He looked at the soldier's back and he looked at the crowd, and he found that the crowd was no longer his. That is the thing he found. 2 minutes before, he had had 40 people on his side, or near enough, because he was the one with the fine coat and the loud voice and I was the one in the gutter. Now he had nobody, because the king's guard, the man whose whole life is discipline and silence, and knowing exactly who is owed honor and who is not, had walked off his post in front of the whole street to salute the sweeper, and you cannot argue with that. You cannot say a clever thing back to a salute. There is no answer to it. He tried all the same. He drew himself up and he said to the rail, to anyone who would still meet his eye, "Well, the army's standards aren't what they were," and he gave a little laugh that nobody joined, and the laugh died in the cold air all by itself. And then a thing happened that I did not arrange, and the soldier did not arrange, and nobody could have arranged, and it was the crowd that did it, and it was worse for him than anything a soldier or a sweeper could have done. The young clerk who had taken his hat off, he could not have been more than 20, that young man stepped out from the rail, and he came across the crossing to me, the way you do not normally cross between a sentry and his post, and he bent down and he picked the copper out of the gutter, the wet copper the gentleman had thrown at me, and he wiped it clean on his sleeve, and he held it out to the gentleman in gray. "You dropped this, sir," the young clerk said. "I don't think the gentleman wants it." He meant me. I was the gentleman. He called me the gentleman, this boy, in front of everyone, and held the copper out to the man in gray to take back. And there is no insult in the world more total than to be handed your own cruelty back, and told the poor man you tried to buy will not be bought. The gentleman in gray did not take the copper. He looked at it lying on the boy's clean palm, and then he looked round at the rail, at all those faces, and there was not one of them now that would help him be the man he had walked out of his fine house that morning believing himself to be. The two nursemaids had turned their prams so the babies faced away from him. The flower woman had folded her arms. The tourists had stopped filming the palace and were filming him, everyone, and he understood at last that the mourning he had meant to make, the fine gentleman and the groveling sweeper, was being made all right, but he was not the one standing tall in it. He was the one the whole street would carry home on its phones, the man who threw a coin at an old sweeper and was answered by a KingsGuard salute. That picture was already loose in the world by then. There is no calling such a picture back. He went. He did not apologize. I want to be honest. He never said one word of sorry to me, not that morning. But he went, and he went badly, which is to say he went the way a man goes when the ground he was standing on has been taken from under him in front of everyone and he has nowhere to put his feet. He waved his driver up. He climbed into his carriage too fast and caught his fine gray coat on the door and had to tug it loose, and a tug is a small thing, but a small clumsy thing is a terrible thing to do in front of a street that has decided it is done being afraid of you. The young clerk still stood there holding the copper. The carriage pulled away up the mile, and the gentleman in gray did not look out of the window, and that was the last I saw of his face. I did not think then that I would hear of him again. A sweeper does not move in the world where such men are talked about. But I am getting ahead of the story, and the truest part of it is not the gentleman at all. The truest part is what the salute did, and it did not stop when the carriage turned the corner. The young clerk came to me. He did not know what to do with the copper, so he pressed it into my hand after all, and he said, "I'm sorry, sir. I was one of the ones who smiled. At the start, I'm sorry." He was a boy with ink on his cuff and his hat in his hand, late for an office that would dock him for it, and he had crossed a public square to tell an old sweeper he was sorry for smiling. I told him it was all right. I told him a man is allowed to learn a thing in the middle of a morning that he did not know at the start of it. He nodded, and he put his hat back on, and he went off to his office, and 3 days later he came back to the crossing on his way to work and stopped and asked me my name, and I told him. And from that morning to this one he says, "Morning, Mr. Tyndall," every working day by name and lifts his hat. A small thing. I have built a great deal of my life out of small things. I know their weight better than most. The flower woman gave me a flower. She would not take a coin for it. She said, "For the man the soldier saluted," and she said it loud enough that 2 or 3 near the rail heard her, and I understood that I had got a name on the street that morning that I had not had the day before, and it was not the man with the broom. It was the man the soldier saluted. I have been called worse. I have been called nothing at all, which is worse than worse. I would carry that name to my grave and count myself rich. The change in the street did not stop with the flower and the boy. I had thought, in my long years, that I knew the people who crossed my stone, knew them the way you know weather, as a thing that passes over you and pays you no mind. I was wrong about how many of them had been seeing me all along. That very afternoon the roasted chestnut man from the corner of the mile, a fellow I had nodded to 1,000 times and never once spoken with, wheeled his barrow over to my crossing at the slow hour, and he tipped a paper cone of hot chestnuts into my hand and would not be paid, and he said, "I saw it, the whole of it. I've stood on this corner 11 years, and I never once thought to bring you something hot on a cold day, and that's a shame on me, and I mean to mend it." And he did mend it. There is a cone of chestnuts on the cold mornings now, and there has been ever since, and we talk, he and I, between the carriages, two men who keep their small posts on the same street and never knew each other until a soldier showed us how to look. A schoolmistress brought her line of children past the crossing that week. She did it on purpose. I understood later, she had heard the story, and she stopped the whole line of them on my clean stone, and she said, in the carrying voice that teachers have, "Children, this is Mr. Tyndall, and he keeps this crossing clean so that you can cross it safely, and that is honest and important work," and a King's Guard saluted him for it. What do we say to a man who does important work? And 40 small voices said, "Thank you, Mr. Tyndall," in that ragged, eager chorus children make, and one little girl at the end gave me a curtsy she had plainly only just learned, wobbling on it, very grave. I had swept that crossing 31 years, and no child had ever been taught, in front of me, that what I did mattered. I went home that night, and I sat a long while in the dark, and I did not feel like the lowest thing on the street. I felt like a man who had been given back something that had been quietly taken from him so long ago he had stopped knowing it was gone. But I have not yet told you the thing that I think you have been waiting to hear, which is why the soldier did it. Because a man does not break the discipline of his post, and make no mistake, it is broken. To leave your sentry line and salute a sweeper is not in any orders ever written. A man does not do that for no reason. And I did not know the reason that morning. I only learned it later, and I learned it from him, which is its own small miracle, because, as I have told you, those men do not speak. It was the next week. I was at my crossing in the gray early hour before the crowds come, the hour I like best, when the stone is mine and the city is just clearing its throat, and a man came down the mile in a plain dark coat with his collar up against the cold, an ordinary man you would not look at twice, and he stopped at my crossing, and it was a moment before I knew him without the red and the bearskin and the height the cap gives them. It was the soldier, off duty. A private citizen in a plain coat, the same as me. He said, "Mr. Tyndall." He knew my name. I do not know how unless he had asked, and I think he had asked. "I hope you don't mind me speaking. I'm not allowed on the post. I am allowed here." I said I did not mind. I said I had hoped, without letting myself hope too hard, that I might one day get to thank him properly off the post where it was allowed. And he told me, standing at my crossing in the cold, with his hands in his pockets and his breath going up white, why he had done it. I will give it to you as near to his own words as I can, because I have kept them. He said, "My father swept a crossing, not in this city, in the town I was born in by the canal. He swept it 40 years. He never had a day that a fine man in a coat didn't tell him he was nothing, and he came home every night and he was not nothing. He was my father, and he was the best man I have ever stood near, the steadiest, and he taught me everything I know about standing your ground without raising your hand. He died at his crossing, Mr. Tyndall, broom in his hand, and no one ever once in 40 years told him that the work he did with that broom was worth a thing." He stopped. The white breath went up. I have stood that post at the rail for 9 years. I have watched 100 fine men cross my crossing to their carriages, and not one of them has ever looked at the man who keeps the stone clean under their boots. And then last week I watched one of them throw a coin at you and call you the lowest thing on the street, and I thought, and here his voice did a thing, a small thing, the only crack I ever heard in him. I thought, that's my father, lying in the gutter after the copper, and I am not allowed to move on the post. It is the whole of what I am, not to move. But I found I could not stand still and let one more fine man tell a sweeper he was nothing, when I knew, Mr. Tyndall, that the sweeper was the better man. So I gave you the only thing I had to give. I gave you the salute I never got to give my father, and I would take whatever came of it. I did not have words. I am not ashamed to say I wept, an old man weeping in the gray morning at his crossing, and he let me. And he did not look away the way the crowd had looked away. He looked at me the way he had looked at me on the morning, steady and level, a man standing with a man. I asked him when I could whether he had got in trouble for it, for leaving the post, because I had worried over that all week. I had thought, what if my one morning of being a man worth honoring had cost that good soldier his place? He smiled then properly, the way I had only half seen him do on the crossing. I expected to, he said. I reported it myself the moment I came off. You're meant to. I left my post, that's a serious thing, and I'd not pretend it wasn't. I stood in front of my officer and I told him what I'd done and why, and I waited for it. And here is the part of the story that I think is the whole of it, the part I tell when people ask me, as they do now, about the morning the soldier saluted the sweeper, because the officer could have broken him. By the letter, he should have. To leave the sentry line is one of the gravest things a guardsman can do. The whole worth of the post is that it does not move, and a post that moves when a man's heart is touched is not a post anyone can rely on. The officer would have been within every right to put him on a charge. He did not. The soldier told me how it went, and I have it from him plain. The officer heard him out, the whole of it, the coin, the crossing, the salute, the father by the canal, and then the officer was quiet a long while, the way a fair man is quiet when he is weighing a thing properly instead of just reaching for the rule. And then the officer said a thing the soldier carried to me like a man carries water across a desert, careful not to spill a drop. He said, "You left your post. I cannot pretend you did not, and I will not, because the post is the post. But I have asked myself what the post is for. We do not stand at that rail to keep the stone. We stand there to show the city what a disciplined man looks like, a man who knows exactly what is owed to whom and gives it without being asked and without being afraid. And you showed them. You showed the whole street in 1 minute the thing it would take me a year of drill to teach. You taught them what honor is. I will not break a man for teaching honor better than I can." There was a hearing, not a charge. The soldier was careful that I should understand it was not a charge, but the regiment does not let a thing like that pass unexamined, because if it passed unexamined, then any guardsman might leave his post for any reason and call it honor. So it was looked at properly by men older and higher than the officer, and I am told, I was not there, you understand. A sweeper is not called to such rooms, that the senior man, the colonel of the regiment, asked only one question. He asked whether the man the guard had saluted was worthy of a salute. And the officer said that in his judgment Job Tyndall, who had kept the cross lane crossing clean for 31 years so that no lady turned her ankle and no gentleman dirtied his boot, asking nothing, thanked by no one, was as worthy of the regiment's honor as any man in the kingdom who had never once been given it. And the colonel is said to have sat with that, and then to have said, "Then the salute was correctly given. A salute is never wrong when it is given to the right man. See that it is not made a habit of, but do not, on my account, make him sorry he gave it." They did not break him. They did not even reprimand him in the end. What they did instead, and this I did not learn for some months, and learned it sideways, the way a small man learns of the doings of great ones, was quieter and larger than either. The regiment keeps its standing orders, the rules by which a guardsman lives, and there is a line in them now, I am told, a line added after that hearing, that says a guardsman who renders honor to an ordinary subject of the crown who has been wronged or demeaned in his presence, and who reports the act at once, shall not be charged for it, provided the honor was rightly owed. They call it, among themselves, the sweeper's line. I did not ask for a line in anyone's book. But I will tell you, it is a fine thing to know that somewhere in the regiment's orders, between the rules for the colors and the rules for the gate, there is a sentence that exists because an old man with a broom was once told he was nothing, and a soldier disagreed. As for the gentleman in gray, I said I would hear of him again, and I did, though never from his own mouth. The picture got out, as I knew it would. The tourist's phone saw to that. By the evening of the morning it happened, the whole city had seen the King's Guard salute the sweeper and the fine man slink to his carriage, and a city that had been bowing and scraping to such men its whole life found that it rather liked watching one of them get answered without a single rude word being said. He was a man of property and a man of business, the gentleman in gray, and he found over the weeks that followed that doors which had always opened for him opened a little more slowly. Not slammed. Nothing so dramatic. Just slower. People remembered the coin in the gutter. A man may be a great deal of things in this world and survive them, but it turns out that a city does not easily go on doing business with a man it has watched throw money at an old sweeper for the pleasure of seeing him crawl. I am told he sold up within the year and went to live somewhere he was not known, where the picture had not reached, where he could begin again being a fine gentleman in front of people who had not seen what he was. I take no joy in his ruin. I am too old and have been too poor to take joy in any man brought low. But I will say this, and then I will leave him. He was humbled not by the soldier and not by me, but by his own copper, lying in the wet of a gutter that an old man had cleaned, in front of a street that had finally been shown there was another way to behave. That is the whole of it. People come to the crossing now and ask me to tell it, and I tell it, and they go away, and I take up my broom again because the carriages still cross and the stone still wants keeping, and I am still, when all is said, a man with a broom. That part has not changed, and I would not have it change. I never wanted to be a fine man. I only ever wanted the work to be worth something, and to be left in peace to do it. But something has changed, and it is the thing the soldier gave me, and it has not worn off in all this time. I stand straighter at my crossing now. When a carriage comes and a great man crosses to it over my clean stone, I do not pull my cap off and shrink into the gutter the way I did for 31 years. I stand to the side, square, my broom by me like a soldier's rifle ordered at his boot, and I lift my cap once level, the way you greet an equal. And most of them, I find, lift theirs back now, because the city remembers, and a man thinks twice about how he treats the man the King's Guard saluted. The soldier still stands his post at the rail. We do not speak there. He is not allowed, and I would not ask it. But every morning when I come to my crossing in the gray hour and he is changing onto his watch, our eyes meet across the cobbles for the space of one breath, the way they met that first morning, and something passes between us that needs no words and breaks no rule. Two working men, one in red and one in rags, each keeping his post, each knowing now what the other is worth. And I have understood, late in my life, the thing he understood young by a canal, watching his father sweep, that there is no lowest thing on the street. There are only men who have been told they are nothing by other men too small to see them, and the great quiet work of honor is to look at such a man, and stand beside him, and show the whole street the truth, that the man with the broom was never in anyone's way at all. He was holding the ground clean so the rest of us could cross.